War Within. My old lady just ordered it today. She was like texting me at work like, "Hey, can I use your debit card?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah." Like, what for? And I saw my email and it was like, "Thanks for ordering the War Within." And I was like, "Oh, here we go."
Mate, honestly, I can't get enough of it. I've literally just been no life in retail for the last 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, you know,
really,
I love it. Literally, we've just been doing Mythic Plus like every night, doing Pug Heroic raids. I've leveled 8 level 70s now, ready for War Within. I'm doing professions. Like, I just honestly, I can't stop. It's just too fun.
Do you have the chat thing working? I don't see it going yet. It's going?
Should be working, but we are live as well now. Oh, it might not be working, you know.
I saw Mind Blown said something, and I was like, well, I don't see it over here on my thing.
If you're watching this...
What was that? Was that me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was trying to figure out how to pull it up on YouTube. I do not watch streams on YouTube, and I have no idea how they work.
I'll send you the link.
Okay.
Anyway, you just do the intro go, and I'm going to try and work out why the chat link's not working.
All right. Well, we are joined today by a brand new guest that's never been on and a brand new topic to talk about that still involves World of Warcraft Classic, and but it's on the WOWSIMS, which everybody uses. Everybody gets referred to if you go ask a question on your class's Discord. You're like, hey, what's the better piece? What's the better weapon? This one or this one? And everybody's just like, bro, just go sim it. Okay, it's like, oh, okay. So it's a very useful tool. It's a tool that is community driven, I would say. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but we're joined by one of the devs today that is involved in that project. And I'm gonna screw it up. I've been calling you Lucy, but Lucinia, is that
Lucenia?
Lucenia, there we go. Yeah. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're gonna be grilling you with the questions about the WOWSIMS, how it works, the pros and cons, the back end sort of stuff. But first we got to get to know you a little bit better, if that's okay, and see like what kind of gamer are you in WoW? Like, where did you start in your WoW journey? Have you been playing since day one of vanilla? Did you have the alpha of vanilla? Are you playing classic? Are you playing retail? Let's get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Really appreciate Go for reaching out. I know you and I have worked a little bit on balance stuff inside and had our brains broken by it. So,
oh yeah.
But yeah, so personally, I've been playing WoW for about 15 years. Not since launch. I would have been very young. I'm sure people have played that young, but not me. I started kind of in late TBC. Played Shaman or Paladin was kind of my first main, and then Shaman kind of became like my forever class that I always like find myself navigating back to. So yeah, I'm a mainly Ellie Shaman player, and for the people who know me, I play Ellie on SOD, I played on Cata, I played on retail. I play a lot of Elemental, and I'm very active in those communities on all three. Still today, like I'm playing SOD pretty actively. Not as much Cata right now. Kind of was doing GDKP, but nah. But I am actually also playing in the War Within. I raid in a cutting edge guild around like world 300 or so, like 300, 400. So definitely excited to, jump back into that this week and go bang my head against a wall for a couple of months trying to prog the raid.
So since you started with playing Paladin and then moved to Shaman, to me that sounds like you started off on the Alliance and then switched to Horde. Does that sound right? Are you a Horde player now, or do you do both factions?
So I am actually for the Alliance generally.
Oh no.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I played Alliance for pretty much the entire time that I played. And in fact, I did not play, well, not vanilla. I didn't play like classic 2019 when it came out era. Part of that was like the gameplay didn't really look fun to me. Like I started in TBC, so that like one button caster gameplay is like, I'm good, right? But also like having to play Horde was honestly kind of a big no for me. But I did begrudgingly do it in SOD. So I guess I play some Horde, but I'm definitely Alliance at heart.
Any PvP at all? Do you do like battlegrounds, arena, anything like that? World PvP?
No, I hate PvP. I'm one of those people who like I will do anything to avoid PvP at pretty much any cost. You know, I've played battlegrounds, I've done arena from time to time, but like I really don't enjoy it. I prefer more like in general PvE focused games. I feel like PvP is a little bit more aggressive, more toxic, and you know, I like to funnel that energy into my guildies instead of like random players.
Still raid leading in any of the games? I know you mentioned, I think it was just before we went live, that you were raid leading at one point. So you're raid leading in SOD at all, or?
No, I did a stint of raid leading back in Shadowlands. I hadn't really played BFA much. Like I didn't really do keys. I didn't raid. My guild kind of fell apart. So kind of played casually back then. And when I came back for Shadowlands, I was like, okay, I need a guild. I want to play the game. Joined probably some like random guild I found in the Guild Finder or something. And we show up to Castle Natru week 1, and it's like a dumpster fire. Like half the roster is not there. There's no like spreadsheet or anything. There was no like call outs, and I'm like, okay, well this isn't gonna work for me. So I just like kind of messaged the GM and I was like, hey, let me help you. And I got like a spreadsheet going. I started recruiting, and then it ended up like I kind of turned into the raid leader for a while for that guild. So really only like heroic and only for a short time. But there's kind of one funny story with that. I did end up on a Liquid Max video, if y'all are familiar, Twitch TV/Max. I'm in his undercover raid leading Alliance video. So if you want some good times, definitely recommend that one. But yeah, after that, like I kind of left that guild, got more into Mythic, and yeah, I don't really raid lead anymore.
I saw you in a different video, or I heard you, should I say, in a different video. A homie that was on the show with us, Scotty Shindig, had myself and Lucy in a video. He's reached out the past, I guess, two tiers. I think it was in ICC. He was doing like a tier set bonus like video, like is it good, is it bad, like where would you rate it? And he came back and asked me again for tier 11, and I was watching the video and I was like, hey, I know Lucy, because she was talking about the Shaman ones, and I was like, hey, cool. So that's why I reached out to you, because I was like, oh, okay, like she's cool with maybe being on the show because she's been on other videos. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you. So a little tidbit there of, you know, why I was like, hey, you want to talk about WOWSIMS?
So I got to ask, as this is going to be the first time I've pretty much spoken, I can't get chat working go firstly, so you're just going to have to look on two windows. It's just started annoying me, and I'm like, just whatever. I just won't reply to anyone. What are you most excited about with War Within? Obviously, it's no secret people on the channel have seen like retail videos popping up the last couple of days, and like I'm mega hyped. But like, is it just the raids? Is that what like the thing that sort of gets you excited for a new expansion, or is there anything else?
So honestly, like, I'm really kind of curious to hear from you about that, because like for me, as someone who's played for so long, I guess you've played longer, but like honestly, I don't really feel the same level of excitement that I used to with WoW expansions. And maybe part of it is like I kind of intentionally now like try and not consume too much content about it. Like I know very little about like the zones and the story and the leveling. I know about like Xalatath and stuff. I've done the raid testing. I've like done class testing, but yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like for me, the lack of like epic cinematics and like having some of that like the big story beats from like the deep lore driven, like Illidan and Arthas and Deathwing, like was in early WoW. I feel like the game is kind of missing a lot of that, and I'm trying to be excited, and I would love to hear from you, like what are you looking forward to too?
Well, for me, like I haven't played retail. Well, I always say I haven't played retail since Legion, but I mean it's a little bit of a lie because I had a stint in BFA, I had a stint in Shadowlands, but I haven't played retail properly since Legion. So I've spent pretty much all the time playing WoW since Legion on private servers or Classic. So like playing the same old expansions over and over again. And I forgot exactly how exciting it is to be fairly clueless. To have an expansion coming up, which I don't know every nook and cranny. I don't know every item. I don't know where it comes from. It's the not knowing, which I'm excited about. So in terms of what I'm excited for, it's the fact that I don't know what I'm excited for is the reason I'm excited for it.
That's a great point.
I love knowing everything ahead of time. That's why I've liked Classic. I can go to Wowhead, all the information's there, and I can be like, "Yep, this is what I need to do," and I'm good to go. Like I'll be the best balanced druid I can be. And yeah, like retail just scares me. I haven't hopped on it in I don't know how long. WOD I think was the last time I really logged into retail, and I tried the mop remix. That was kind of like my toe in the water for was I gonna like retail these days, and it still didn't bring me back into playing retail anymore. So I'm still sticking with Classic. But if I like what I like about Classic expansions like TBC, Wrath, Cata was that beginning hype. Like those first 2 weeks, getting pre-raid gear, getting reputations grinded up, getting new enchants. Getting a lot of new pieces of gear in a short amount of time feels really, really good. Like that's what I love about it.
But that's going to be the same in War Within. I mean, that's going to be exactly the same. But yeah, I mean, obviously, when I say I don't know anything, of course I've spent time on the beta. I've been like practicing leveling routes today, and yeah, I still play the game as seriously as possible. But I've not. I don't go as overboard, because I don't want to know every detail. Like with Dragonflight, I pretty much started playing it, properly a month ago, and really just leaned on people that I know that play the game or worked it out for myself. Like I didn't sit watching YouTubers. I didn't watch guides on anything. It was like, oh, I'll just work it out, and. Yeah, it's been an experience, but I forgot how, like, this is not like a negative comment, even though it might sound like it. I forgot how simple it all actually is. First looking at retail, you're like, oh my God, this is all so complicated. And then really you're just like, nope, this is literally the same shit that they done 5 years ago. Like every system is still, it's like, oh, item upgrades, that comes in MOP. Like we're gonna have that next year in Classic. It may be that you can upgrade them to slightly higher levels and you get slightly different levels of gear that can be upgraded further, but there's still not really that much difference. There's normal gear, heroic gear, mythic gear. It might have a funny little name next to it being like Awakened or Hero or whatever, but like ultimately all the systems have just been polished up, but they're the same. And it took me a little while to really get that, to be like, so why are you trying to look at this like it's something new? Literally Blizzard are just renaming stuff and it's still the same as it was like 5-6 years ago. I love it though, like genuinely. Like some of the stuff that's coming in War Within, like delves. I'm hyped for raids and delves. That they're the two biggest things I would say. But anyway, maybe talk about WoWSIMS. What do you reckon?
Yeah, so you play Shaman in game, but do you
Mhm.
work on only Shaman for WoWSIMS, or are there other specs that you do dev work for?
Yeah, so actually originally when I started on the site, I didn't do any of the sim code, the stuff that is actually like mimicking the gameplay and doing all that. Like that is something that is actually kind of even newer for me. Like I didn't really start getting into that until kind of around side. And that was mostly out of necessity. Before that, like I started like almost 2 years ago now, I think, mostly doing UI work for the project. Like for people who have been using it for a long time. We used to have kind of a janky UI, and one of our contributors had kind of put together these like mock-ups for like a redesign, like rethinking what WoWSIMS could look like. And I was like, that's really cool. I like UI, I like UX, and like started kind of doing that slowly over time and like kind of changing a little piece at a time. And then kind of did that like periodically. And then it wasn't really until like this year, like going into SOD, where someone like started a SOD project and got kind of like the groundwork going. And I was like, okay. I reached out in the Shaman Discord and I was like, would anyone be interested in working on this?
Crickets, right?
Awkward silence, right? There was nobody really there. Like we had some players who had been working through Wrath, who are still working on Cata too, who were kind of working on like their classes that they play, but nobody was doing Shaman. And I was like, you know what? I've been working on this for a long time. I'm gonna try it and see how it goes. So started with Shaman, and then I also play like Shadow Priest and Boomkin. So I kind of just like, again, we didn't really have anyone to do those. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do Shaman, I'll do Balanced Druid, I'll do Shadow Priest, and then it kind of turned into, well, we've known on Feral, but like Nerd Egg had like done a little bit of Feral, and so I like picked it up from there. And then someone had like started Mage, but like Mage wasn't done. And this was back in like, I would say like phase 2-ish. We, kind of like launched the site, and we were like trying to get every class kind of like up to speed, provide all of them. And so at that point, like I was pretty much doing, I think, about like 5 different sims. So Ellie, I was doing enhancement as well, Feral, Balance, Mage, and then kind of did that through like phase 3. And then when Cata came around, I didn't really do a lot of individual class work, but I kind of did like a massive overhaul of our code going into Cata. A lot of people who use the site in Wrath and inside too probably noticed how like we, some sims are like for one spec, some are for an entire class, like Mage, for example, inside Rogue. Rogue, we have like tank and DPS, but you know what I mean. And so like going into Cata, we were like, okay, we want to split this off. Every spec is going to have their own sim, and like doing that required, I think I changed like 1,000 files or something. Spent like a week pretty much working on it full time. And I mean, it ended up working. It was cool. I implemented like the restricted talent trees the way they are, where like you have to put them like in that specs tree before to like open up. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the extent of things. In SOD phase 4, like a lot of people quit, unfortunately, and that included our developers. And so like going into phase 4, I I was kind of like, hey, are like you still working on the project? No, you quit SOD. Great, I'm gonna try and pick this up. So now I kind of cover most of the specs in SOD. I'm kind of the main developer on it. I do like warrior now. I do warlock. I don't know anything about like rogue. Rogue's weird to me. It's like the class that I don't like at all in the game. But yeah, try to do like little bits of code for everything when I can. But we do still have a couple of people who like, contribute to like, especially rogue, paladin, and hunter.
No one likes rogues, don't worry. They all wear funny hats. All right, Simon, nice. Anyway.
Oh, I am so sorry if I offended you.
So when it comes to, like, we spoke a little bit when we was, like, yeah, before we went live, and we were talking about raid bots and Simcraft, and, like, I've personally used Simcraft for years. Like, literally, like I said earlier when I was saying about quitting, during Legion and playing private servers. Like, I've got a working version of Simcraft for almost every patch of, from 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, yeah, all the way up until, well, pretty much the final patch of WOD. Like, raid bots and all modern retail obviously runs on that. That project has never ended. Simcraft has been around, yeah, for a long time. Is there anything like that WoWSIMS runs on? Like, it's got a back end that you've built on, or is this something like completely fresh?
Yeah, so WoWSIMS was started kind of in TBC Classic, I believe. And this was like well before I joined the project. We originally had 2 people who have kind of stepped away from the game now, but they like got everything up and going. And I think it was kind of modeled after Simcraft. But one of the differences is like we do have a different tech stack that we use. Like we have all of the sim code is written in a language called Go, which I feel like personally is a lot easier to work with. It's much more user-friendly, and even people who have done minimal coding can come into our code base and they're like, wow, this is actually readable. I can actually tell what stuff does, even though they don't know Go. Heck, like when I started working with it, I barely knew Go. Like it's really cool. It's very friendly. Compared to
Go.
It's Go. The original Go is the name of the code, right? It's not GHO. I didn't steal my name from
the final straw. There was when Lucy said Go's friendly. I was like, no, we've got to cut that off now because no, he's not. Sorry, carry on.
But I had asked Lucy about something, and she sent me like a text file, and it had like the lines of code, and I was like, all right, let me see if I can interpret this. And I kind of like navigated myself through it. Like it really wasn't that bad. Like as a non-coder, I could kind of figure out where I was at and what to look for in the code. So it was kind of cool.
So
I definitely think that.
Go on, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I definitely think that that's one of the big benefits that we have over Simcraft. Like Simcraft does have a very much larger developer base on, working on their code. And, I know a lot of the people who are like doing the elemental shaman work for that. The code is horrible to look at. I do not like the language they use. It's called C++, and like, even just earlier today, I was like looking in the old Simcraft Cata code. I was trying to implement some of the Mage tier 12 bonuses, and I'm like, this code is really hard to read. I feel like our code base is very friendly, very, very beginner friendly. So
when it comes to the actual sort of back end, like the calculations, the you know, how it works out like over a single iteration or thousands of iterations, is it still very much in like the like with stat weights, you know, where it would say, right, 1 agility is worth this amount of damage, you've got this amount of agility, so this is how much damage you're going to do, and then it bases that on, you know, before like haste breakpoints, after haste breakpoints, where haste will then lose value. Is that how it? This is a 2-part question, but is that sort of how it's structured still?
It's definitely very different. I mean, it's kind of like playing a game, but in your browser, on your computer. Like we are really truly modeling game mechanics. Like we have, you know, concepts for like spells and auras. We have like, for melee, like hit tables are a thing, and like all of these like dynamic calculations for stats, and like what the different like results of your abilities, like whether it landed, crit, if it missed, got parried, all of these things. Like it is definitely a lot more complicated than just like, you know, what stats do you have equipped, and like doing some like, because you can like spreadsheet things, right? But a lot of that really comes down to calculating averages and then, you know, kind of doing some math within the spreadsheet. Whereas like this is, I feel like, far more complicated.
Okay. That obviously, makes sense. It's the same way, like I would compare it to things like raid bots, where like stats are always changing. You get one of one, another one can be more powerful. But like I was having this argument with someone, well, not argument, discussion with someone on stream a few days ago. So how does it work when you've got an item which isn't necessarily like obviously strong? So I'll use an example. A Ret Paladin. We'll say Ret Paladin, Toll Barrage Strength Trinket. So obviously the power of that Strength Trinket comes from the fact that even though it's got lower strength than what you could get from you know, alternative sources where it could possibly have a higher strength proc or strength on use, but obviously it lines up with cooldowns. So like, are those items sort of having to have their own individual sort of use cases across different classes, or is that you go like the sim just knows like, oh, actually this trinket will line up with cooldowns, so this one will be X amount more powerful than, you know, a second option?
It will, yeah, items like that are like anything that is like a proc or an on use, like those are all manually implemented by our developers. You know, if you've got a, like the example you used, what is a on-use trinket, 1600 strength, 2-minute cooldown. In our code, there is code that says, if you have this trinket equipped, create an aura that will give your character 1600 strength for however long. It's got a 2-minute cooldown. It shares, you know, whatever like trinket cooldown. And it will essentially like, it's kind of like playing your character, you know, to see like, okay, what effect does this have on your damage? It's not as simple as like mathing out like, okay, 1600 strength over 20 seconds. I don't know, it comes out to however much per minute, and then the duration, like it's not nowhere near that simple. That'd be really cool if it was. It'd definitely be easier, but
so you have to actually, you would have to say like it could work that out. Best way to explain it. So in an isolated use case, like if we was to say, right, you've got this trinket, 2-minute cooldown, yeah, it gives you a bunch of strength. Like on its own, it's a strong trinket. It would be worth, you know, this amount of DPS. But so you would actually, you as a developer would need to go in and say, well, actually, it's worth more because it's the exact same cooldown as Zealotry and Wings, and you're going to use them together. So like the question is more like, does the sim know that actually that trinket is now 20% stronger from wings, for example, and it's getting more value because you're using more Templar's Verdict because you've got zealotry up? You know, it takes those things into account, or is that where you have to step in and do that manually? Because I mean, if you've got to do that manually for loads of trinkets and loads of like procs and stuff, I'm guessing that. Well, I mean, it's giving me a headache just thinking about the fact that you might have to do that.
So I totally get what you mean. Yeah, any item like that is completely. It does not know anything about like what class it's being used by, spec. It doesn't know anything about your cooldowns. So the way that actually works is we have a concept called APLs. Which stands for Action Priority List. Essentially, it's how you define your priority when you're playing the game. Like what spell, you know, when you think like, if I'm starting a poll, what do you do? Why do you do it? What decisions do you make? When do you press things? Why do you press things? All of those decisions are actually coded into these APLs. Like if you know, for example, to like go to the ret sim, you click on the rotation tab, you click on the
rotation type.
Yeah, they've got like, I think a default APL on the Cata one. So when you pull that up, you'll see like a big list with a bunch of paladin abilities. You'll see conditions for like when to use all of them. And so that logic is kind of what tells the sim, you know, what the character is actually doing and like what decisions you're making. And so, for example, if you're making the decision, I want to line this trinket up with my Avenging Wrath or whatever paladin cooldowns, like that's going to be in the APL. And the cool thing about it is like people can, you know, people in the community can go in, they can change all of these things. You know, people can experiment. They very often do find ways to improve things. And, you know, I probably wake up every other day to messages, people being like, hey, Lucy, I found, you know, this, and this better gear. I found this, and this, like, better APL setup to, like, and a lot of times it's like 10, 20 DPS on side or, you know, something really small on Cata. But it's really cool because not only is it, you know, it kind of like mimics when you go look at like a Wowhead guide, for example, and you go to rotation and they're like, yeah, you know, this is like your top priority ability, and then here's your next one, here's your next one. It's kind of similar, but it also gives people the power to go in and question the assumptions that we make. You know, maybe they find something better, and it adds another level of like community engagement too. So
yeah, and
really
it's
cool.
good. It's good for both. Like if you was to think of two different extremes when it comes to players, you've got people who just want something simple that they can go on and very user friendly, really easy to navigate, and go, is this item better? And then they put it in, they sim it, and go, yes, this item's better. But then you've got the other extreme, like the other end of the scale, of people who can go in and customize, they can play about, they can, yeah, like change the APL, for example. They can, yeah, where, so that's really cool that it actually suits sort of, yeah, both types of people.
I remember the sim used to have an option where you could tell it like when you wanted trinkets to like be used and cooldowns to be used, like when you wanted lust. Is that all kind of automatic now by default? But if you wanted to change it for specific things, you would have to go to the APL for that type of stuff. And I also remember like trinket swapping pre-pool. I guess that would maybe be an option to do in your rotation for the APL. You could do a pre-pool action to have your trinket swap or proc, I guess, so that it would be off cooldown at a certain point in your rotation.
So I think APLs kind of started, I want to say back in about fall of 2023 or so. And before then, we kind of had two different ways that your rotation would be set up. It was all hard-coded. So, one of the downsides was like we had to have a developer go in and, really kind of fine tune that like logic in code to say, what is your character doing and why? Then you would oftentimes have like a set of options in the UI that you could like go in, you could potentially, I don't know, we still actually have it for one sim, the feral sim. So I'll use that as an example really quick. So like on Cata, we have like a maintain fairy fire, enable leaf weaving, whatever that means, enable bear weaving, bunch of other complicated cat stuff. I don't play cat, I'm sorry. So you kind of had that. And one benefit was it's really simple for any user to go in, change those options, and it's kind of descriptive, at least, of like what it's doing. The downside was that people can't change their priority necessarily. Like everything you can do is up to what our developers give you as a user, and there wasn't that like granular control for maybe I don't want a certain ability to be like higher priority. Maybe I want to try some other like not a very like straightforward build, like something more hybrid. I don't know. It was really difficult to maintain. It didn't give that flexibility, and ultimately, like we did decide to move to APLs. For the most part, it's been really successful. The only classes that really kind of struggle with it are energy classes. Like it's really hard to model energy rotations in APLs because they do like energy pooling and like weird combo point stuff. I don't know. I don't really play them, but you can still though, like if you really want to say, I want to use a trinket at exactly 45 seconds, you can do that. Like the conditions exist that you can set it up to do it that way. And like on our SOD warrior sim, for example, we have a lot of conditions that tell the sim to pop cooldowns kind of in the last 25, 30 seconds, because that's when we kind of generally put the sim in like execute phase. And so they're going to be able to press execute, and they want to like funnel as much of their cooldowns into that window as possible. And so, yeah, we do still have those conditions. You can also just say like, is it in execute phase? That's also totally fine. But yeah, ideally a lot of the same control as before, but more flexibility for the users.
Cool. Go.
All right. Yeah. I feel like we just let you talk for a long time, that we need to give you a break. So Scotty, she was mentioning that phase 2 was kind of when there was no Mage Developer for Sims. Is that why you stopped playing SOD? You didn't have a sim to rely on to help you pump?
I didn't need a sim to pump. It was like one button, mate. It was like don't need a sim to pump on SOD. What are you talking about? No. So the thing is, though, like in all seriousness, with like how reliant people are on sims, which I think's a good thing. Like I sim characters regularly, yeah, both retail and classic. I found more in Cata, and please don't take this as a negative, like at all. It's not. I know, like, there's just so many more variables in Cata compared to what there was in Wrath. Even maybe ICC started to get a lot more variables when you're on bosses and stuff like that. But I do find that my own personal damage is never even, I don't want to say remotely near the sim. Like, no matter how many iterations I run, and I've played a feral DPS for like many, many years. It's just, it doesn't seem to fluctuate quite. It fluctuates far more than it was during RAF. Like, is there any reason for that? And again, sometimes I could do on fights where there's not even extra damage taken. For example, I can do 3 or 4k more than what the sim says. So can do substantially more. And I don't know. I feel like during RAF, it was really like my feral was almost spot on. And I know, obviously, you've said nerd Egghead, works on the feral sim, and I've spoke to him, I believe, in the past on the Druid Discord, so I know he knows his stuff. But is there more difficulty with Cata, like to get the numbers right?
Can I start off with something really quick? All right, so I don't know how big of a gap it was, but are you looking at the whole chart of your results, or are you just looking at like you're hitting the sim and it's like, okay, it says 30k DPS, so I should be doing 30k DPS? Because like the balanced druid one right now for Cata, it's got like a top end of 34,000 and a lower end of 27,000, and I feel like that's like where my DPS is usually at, like in that range.
What did you say the range was?
27k to 34,000. Like 30, yeah. Like on the flow chart, it's got like the blue section in the middle.
The histogram, the histogram.
Lower, and the red upper. It's a lot more than just like the plus 926. That's like right next to the value that you hit if you hit sim.
Yeah, but I would assume
that's a low number.
I would assume the variance is the blue section, Lucy. Is that right? As in when you get the variance, when you sim and you can see what the variance can be, is that the bottom end and top end of the blue section on the histogram? Sorry for people who can't see. I can show you what we're talking about.
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't know for sure exactly like where that cutoff between the blue and the red is. I've never personally worked with that bit, but yeah, there is always a bit of variance. I mean, even every single iteration, like if you go to your results tab, for example, we have a button to sim a single iteration. If you click that, like you are going to get very different results, because ultimately like RNG is a thing in every rotation, and sometimes you get really lucky with your RNG and you will feel like a god, and then maybe the next week something goes wrong and all of a sudden you're like, I don't feel like I'm doing damage. That's not to say that it's definitely a lot more complicated trying to model Cataclysm with reforging, completely different mechanics, far more complicated rotations and interactions. Like it's extremely challenging, and our developers do put a lot of time in to try to make sure that like the classes that they're representing, that they're building for, are going to be as accurate as possible. And like I can't speak to like the feral sim and like nerd Egghead's work, but I know for me, like on my elemental shaman, my damage on many of the fights in tier 11 has been pretty spot on with the sim. And there are times that I do beat it, and then the next week I'm like, I feel like I didn't change anything, and all of a sudden it's a lot lower. And a lot of it really does come down to the sim is not perfect. It's a patchwork encounter where mechanics don't exist. You're not taking damage, you're not taking pushback, you're not having to move generally. It's an ideal reflection of what you can do in a perfect scenario, which is kind of the same as raid bots on retail. They by default, like they do the same thing. You can try to simulate other scenarios, like you can add in some cleave. You can there's kind of some janky ways to add in like getting hit by stuff. It's not really that straightforward, but You know, I know, like, I usually try to say, like, always, the sim is a tool, and we try our best. Always take it with a grain of salt, too, because there are times that, like, we do get it wrong. You know, there have been plenty of times where I have coded something and it didn't work the way that I thought it was. There was a bug. Maybe someone else did in-game testing and found different results from like what other people showed the first time. You know, those things do happen, and we typically, you know, we try to think of it as like it's continuously evolving, right? SOD Phase 4 that I do the majority of my work on came out, what, like a month and a half ago now-ish, or something, like a month. And I still pretty much every day am having to like go in and make changes. Like, people find stuff, people find issues. You know, we do our best. And
well, I think you're doing a great job.
Perfect.
I don't want you to. The question might have been not framed the best. Like, you know, the point of the question really was, how complex Cata is compared to Wrath, rotationally, trinkets, procs on weapons, like, and all of that. You know, it was more around that, making it have that much bigger variance than what it had during Wrath. You know, not the the sim's wrong because I'm doing more damage. You know, it's more the fact that that it is just probably more challenging to get things accurate. The same way I'd imagine retail is an absolute fucking nightmare to get anywhere even near accurate when you've got things like Grief Torch that does 1 million damage, and you know, depending on how many people die, it depends on how many uses of it you get, and you know, you start putting that in. How on earth do you even, where do you begin to sim that? You know, but no, I'm sure everybody uses it, and like I say, I use it all the time. I personally think, you know, it's a great tool. I think everybody who doesn't know about it should know about it and should be using it anyway. But yeah, it's just something I've noticed, and I feel like it's going to carry on into MOP if you're still maintaining the tool in MOP Classic when we get it. I think, again, there's just going to be these bigger variances than what people have been used to. Because when it existed in TBC and you had Warlocks pressing 1 button and you had Hunters pressing maybe 2 buttons, you know, it was like, even the sim must be simpler to code and to maintain when the rotations are so simple, and the items as well and are just as simple, you know, when you think back to trinkets and stuff like that in TBC. So yeah, like, please don't think it was a dig about WOWSIMS, because my entire guild uses it. It's just more that people, like somebody said it straight away in chat, like, oh, I agree with that point, you know, as in the variance and seeing much bigger variances. I think it's just something that people need to get used to, because I hear it all the time when people are like, I've simmed this and my DPS has gone down, and I'm like, your DPS can't go down. You know, like, you're a melee, you're you know, a melee class. It's a melee weapon. You're going from 359 to 372. It is impossible for your DPS to go down. And then it will turn out that actually they've not simmed it properly. They've had a setting not on, or do you know what I mean? Then they've done it.
To enchant it, yeah.
Yeah, no enchant on it. Like, you know, it could be, or they're not hit capped because they've changed the weapon and now they're under the hit cap. Like, you know, there's loads of reasons, but that's why I think there also needs to be, you know, an element of common sense when, you know, like you said, it's a tool at the end of the day, you know, and a tool's only as good as you use it, to be fair.
Yeah.
I know back in Phase 3, just a month ago, I was shooting you messages for a couple days in a row because I got really into theory crafting, like making sure that the sim was working, calculating all the damage right for Boomy, and I was just like, hey, like Starfall's not working right. It's supposed to do this, this, and this. And I would send it to you, and it'd be like later that day, it would be on the sim, it'd be updated, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, I love like how fast the sim can change. But on the other hand, on the flip side, it's hard for somebody that I don't know, just uses the tool every day, and then they see one value, and then something like that changes, and then the next day they go back and they're like, now it's simming something different, and they don't know what changed. But I feel like you're starting to try to take some steps to get more information like that out there of those changes. I know you've been going into a couple of the class discords. I don't know if it's in SOD 2 that you're doing it for, or if it's just like Cata or what it is, but maybe you can elaborate on like some updates for each classes that at least you're working on, that once it gets a change, it'll be posted in the class discords. So can you talk about those changes and how that's becoming more available and ready or easily to see?
Mm-hmm. I feel like especially with Season of Discovery, we've seen this a lot more, where things are moving fast. Things are constantly breaking, both in the sim and in game, and it's very, very difficult to keep up. And I think that's true for both our developers and for users. I totally hear y'all. Where like, I can't even say how many times I got a message where someone is like, Lucy, why is this number different? I got this yesterday, I got this today, what changed? And I'm like, I don't know. It's a lot. And, it also, like, when people see a difference, I think, you often question like the integrity of the site, right? A lot of people like jump to that conclusion. They're like, well, the sim must be wrong about something, or like the sim can't be trusted. I've heard that plenty of times too. Sometimes it is like user error. I've had people who like tell me something about like enhancement, and then it turned out like they didn't have an imbue on their offhand, which that's a pretty hefty amount of DPS. That's like 500 DPS or something. But yeah, I think, our group of developers, like we've talked about how do we improve the communication? How do we like help people get a better idea of, what things are changing? Why are your numbers changing? It is a challenge. We've talked about like trying to do like an automatic change feed, but ultimately that only goes as far as like people like actually saying when they've changed things, right? And for some of the ones that I've generally maintained, like I've kind of worked with class discords to like get channels going where I can like post updates, just to like let people know, right? Give that like peace of mind, like your thing changed and here's why. And like and I feel like too, it's like when you have the developers like coming in and interacting and like giving updates, like you have a better idea that like there are people looking at these things, and we're working on these things. We're here for you. Like we do work really hard. So yeah, right now I'm trying a thing where like we have like a channel set up in our Discord, one for Cata and then one for SOD, where we can push updates to class discords who are basically like following that channel, and it'll like send it out to them. So we're hoping that maybe can be a good way to kind of share some of those bigger updates. Obviously, if I change something for like a warrior, the warlock Discord, the Shaman Discord, like they don't need to know that. I'll still, pop by their Discord and like type up a message in the channel. But yeah, just trying to find ways to like keep that communication going, best as we can.
Cool. I've got another question. Go just quickly.
Yeah, go.
Have you started already on tier 12, like items, and not necessarily like pre-built BIS lists, but like the items? Obviously, I've done some general simming. Well, obviously, some of the sims don't work when you put tier 12 gear in yet, do they? I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
Yeah.
Is that something like that's going to be coming soon, so people can start simming their tier gear and weapons and trinkets and sort of know that it's accurate?
Yeah, so a lot of times with especially with tier bonuses, it really comes down to the individual developers who are managing those sims. I will say I went together and compiled a list earlier today after y'all had asked about it, and I think we have somewhere around 2/3 done now for tier 12, 2/3 of the tier bonuses. I think it really comes down to one question, which is, would you rather have something implemented that we can't verify, or would you rather not have something, know it's not there, but potentially not have misleading result?
Mm-hmm.
And so as an example, the Feral tier 12 two-piece bonus has some kind of dot mechanic that I think there's kind of questions around how that works. I think we think it's an ignite type mechanic, but there's some other things is it rolling or some other things that I didn't really understand from Nerd Egghead. But his view was, if I implement this now, not knowing these things before we can get on a beta or the PTR and test it out, is it better to put something out there and potentially give a misleading result, knowing that what we're giving you may not be accurate? Or would it be better to not implement it, say, this is not implemented, we are trying to acknowledge we need more testing before we feel comfortable putting this in. And ultimately, it is something that we are talking about how to handle. I do think we want to try and improve the communication around that. Ideally, some kind of way that in the UI we can tell users, hey, this tier bonus is not implemented. Hey, this trinket is not implemented. I know most of the tier 12 trinkets, from what I've been told by others, are implemented, but a couple ones aren't. And right now as a user, there's no way of knowing that. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just really funny that you was talking about the two-set feral, because I literally, just before we went live, was editing a video about the druid, all free spec, druid tier sets. And the way it's meant to work, again, depending on how it's implemented in Classic, is obviously, it does 10% of your, if we just use Shred, because it does mangle and more as well if you use the Bear Weave. But, 10% of the damage of Shred, it is then a fire dot on the target over 4 seconds. But then any future shreds you do should add on to what is left. So if there was 2 seconds between the first shred and the second shred, obviously half of that 10% will be lost, but the new 10% will be added on top of it. So while you've got Berserk up, you can get that 10% stacked up really, really high. But that's how it's meant to work. But yeah, when it comes to actually how it's implemented, Blizzard, who knows?
It sounds like Ignite.
It's like Languish. It's like Ignite. It's yeah.
Well, Languish didn't really work, and not on the Sims, but in game, Languish didn't really work because if there was 2 boomies, then the Languish got screwed, and it was only one boomie that got benefited. So hopefully that's not the same case for ferals in tier 12.
Well, it's not just feral. A lot of the classes have a similar 2-set. So Ret Paladin's Crusader Strike does 15% as a fire dot over 4 seconds. That's not as much of an issue because outside of being under Lust, you're not going to be your Crusader Strike will be about 4.1 second cooldown anyway. So the dot will always fall off before you press it again. So that's quite easy because it's 15% of your Crusader Strike. But yeah, when it comes to ones where you can actually stack them, then yeah, obviously that is down to Blizzard to actually implement it. But I agree with what you're saying, Lucy, 100%. It's you can start. Also, you don't want to do it twice. Do it all, and then you find out that's not how it works. And I mean, it's got to be pretty frustrating where, let's say, with a feral 2-set, let's say I'm wrong and it doesn't work like that when we get the beta. When we get the PTR. and instead it's overriding it. So every new shred is actually now just a new fire dot, and you're losing some of the portion before. That could potentially change the rotation. That could potentially get fixed by the time it goes live. So even when it comes to PTR, it's got to be a bit dodgy, because you'll do it all, and then it's like day before it's meant to go live, it's like, by the way, we've fixed this. It's like, oh, great, thanks.
I mean, it's like they've been doing it in SOD too. Like they're fixing runes in SOD as of like yesterday. So that's got to be kind of frustrating as a dev on a sim website. Like you've got it coded to work this way, and then all of a sudden the devs in game make an adjustment, and it's like, okay, now we got to go in and change it again. Like, oh my goodness, it's like a headache.
Yeah, we definitely end up in that situation quite a lot. I know, like the specific issue with the feral 2-piece, the tier 12 one is like, Egghead said it's like something with munching, and he called it vomit interactions. I have literally no idea what that means.
Stuff. Yeah, that's mage terms. They're ignite vomiting and ignite munching.
Yeah, so like his mentality was, I would rather not implement this until we can get on PTR and verify that interaction, because like for feral, that is a concern. Whereas like Scotty mentioned, we do have the RET 2-piece and 4-piece implemented, because it's not as much of a concern. And also, like, every developer is different on our team. Like, we all have different opinions about things, so like how things should be done. And it ultimately, like, sometimes that is also an influencing factor.
So what about the balance druid 2-piece for tier 12? Because it involves a summoned treant. And I would ask also about our force of nature treant cooldown too. Like how would you try to figure out how much damage those treants do as the talent, the normal baseline talent, and the treants that we're going to see that spawn from the tier 12 set bonus? Do you kind of have to assign it like a base value and just kind of like let it go? Or is there any information that you can get from Wowhead that tells you how much damage that those treants are going to do, and then all the modifiers can apply to it afterwards? Or
anything involving pets is probably the bane of my existence. Anything with pets is infinitely more difficult than any other kind of proc or effect. Not only is it like more work for us to actually set up we call it AI conditions, pet stuff, but it's a lot more work for us to implement, because pets are complicated. Pets inherit stats from the owner, from the player. Sometimes it's not even consistent. Like every class is different. Every pet is different. And even when we're going into the game files or like into Wowhead, that information usually isn't readily available. Like earlier, I was taking a look at the Mage tier 12 2-piece that summons a mirror image. And at face value, you might be like, oh, that seems really simple, right? That's what I did. I was like, oh, this is really easy. I was trying to help get some of them done. And then I look at a Wowhead comment, and it's not a normal mirror image. It's a completely different one that thankfully some like random people from 2011 did testing to figure out like, what's the damage range on this? What does it do? That kind of stuff is really, really tedious. And, I know like you mentioned, the balance 2-piece, probably the same way. It summons a treant. The Warlock 2-piece also summons some kind of like imp. Those are the worst. And, thankfully we do have the old Simcraft Cata that we can also go back to use as a reference. Sometimes we can get information from the Wowhead comments, but if not, then usually it's down to like we have to get people on a PTR, on a beta, to figure these things out. Another great example is like on SOD, the like Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest has what, like, if you count the 3 individual homunculi that all hit for different amounts and do different things, they also have their Shadow Fiend, and they have their Eye of the Void.
Yeah.
So they have like 5 total pets that you can get almost no information about until we have logs to kind of see what they do, because Wowhead doesn't really give us anything on them. And generally, unless if a pet is a guardian, there is no way in game to see, for example, like what the pet stats are, to get an idea of like what's the base damage, and to get an idea of like what kind of like scaling do they have from the owner. So things like that are very, very annoying, unfortunately. And yeah, we do our best. It's really hard.
Like I've tried to figure out how much damage treants do. Like, what did they get buffed by back in like TBC? I think is when we finally got them for the first time. And it being such a long cooldown, I've sat there for hours and summoned treants. Like, had tried to get intellect procs, because back then people were like, "Oh yeah, treants definitely scale from spell power 100%." And I would do like multiple tests, and I'd be like, all right, I've got this proc, this proc, this proc. Let me pop my treants and see if there's a damage difference. And then there's just normal variance in the damage that they do on top of it. And I gave up. I gave up on trying to figure it out. So like, I feel bad that like you're trying to work on these pet stuff for the Sims to work too, because I know that's a frustrating one on my end as a user. Like I can't imagine how much like you guys have to try to dig to find the right answers to try to make it as accurate as possible.
Well, assuming that they work again, like when we're talking specifically Druid, I've been doing loads of testing myself on everything, all of these Druid tier sets. And while we know private servers are not, they're not the most accurate source of information. You can get a good feel for how things should be. But ultimately, when it comes to how Blizzard implement them, sometimes it's wildly different. But from what I've seen with the 2 set, it is about a 45-second cooldown, and that it's got fixed damage. It's like 9 to 11k-ish. Don't quote me on those numbers, but yeah, it's like 9 to 11k, and it didn't matter whether I had gear on, as in whether I had just a 2-piece on to make it proc, or I had a full set of gear on. It always done the same amount of damage, but it was scaling with spell damage taken on the dummy. But it was, it's still substantial. But they did actually change, and I could pull it up and look through when those tier sets changed. It weren't even during Cata. I think it was like during MOP. But they had fixed values on all of them, like the priest 4 set, so healing priest 4 set. Where it puts like an ember on someone, and then it fires out like healing fiery bolts at people within 40 yards. It always fires out 5, it always fires out 1 a second, and they always do 10,000 each. But then that did actually change at some point to 100% of your spell power. So it's like you never really quite know what version of any of it you're going to get. So it's like easy to speculate, and it's easy to go on like loads of different private servers or host your own, or look at it, but ultimately it comes down with how Blizzard handle these things when they eventually go on the PTR.
All right, so this one, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I made sure with Scotty earlier that this was correct, but because I was at work all day, and I think in phase 1 there was some gear, some loot that was available on the Sims that weren't actually in the game in phase 1, and it would be like a higher eye level version of the same piece of gear. So it was like trying to get on there before Cata launched, like in the pre-patch, and figure out like what gear to have for my pre-raid set. I'd go on there, and then I'd see a piece of loot, and I'd be like, oh, okay, cool, this is it. And then I'd do a little bit more research and figure out, oh, this isn't going to be in the game. And the same thing is going on for phase 3, I guess it is, for Firelands. So for example, there was a belt I asked Scotty, I was like, yo, there's a 391 eye level belt that's on the sim, the Fire Scar Sash, and it's a belt that you get from the Avengers of Hyjal when you're honored. But it's a 378 item, and I was looking through Wowhead comments, and they were like, yeah, you use a crystallized fire to upgrade this belt to the 391 item. And I was like, Scotty, can you upgrade the Avengers of Hyjal rep pieces with the crystallized fire? And he was like, no, you can't do that. But it was in the game files originally back in Cata, so I know it's kind of pulling that data from Wowhead that Wowhead has. So like Wowhead has that item in its inventory, and then you go onto the sim and it's like trying to figure out the pre-raid gear for Firelands, and there's that 391 version of it. So that's in the sim right now. So like, how does that work for you when there's an item like that and somebody sends you a message and is like, hey, this item's not going to be available?
I
Like,
just
what
want to
do you
butt
do at
in.
that
I
point?
just want to butt in, Lucy, before you start, because this is just Go being really salty that in the next tier of content there is no 391 belt for druids.
Yeah.
Not for balance, not for resto.
Really?
Feral gets it, because
Feral gets
Feral
one.
can get a BOE belt from Trash, which you Riplim's collar, which you can upgrade with a crystallized firestone. But yeah, balance druids and resto druids, they are stuck with a 378 rep belt. That's it.
Yeah, and that's what we had. We had a relic that was 359 right now in phase 1, and then now it's like it's Blizzard's fault that we don't have yet again another phase that we don't have an item that can be like not the highest eye level, because you can get 397 from Rag, but you can't get like a huge item level upgrade for this one slot. And I guess it just so happened I was looking at the belt and found out that there's an item that's on the sim that we're not going to be able to get. So yeah, how does that work? Sorry, like how does that work if I tell you now, like, hey, Firescar Sash 391 eye level, that's not going to exist, but it's in the sim? Like, what happens?
Yeah, so unfortunately, like I imagine what Blizzard probably did way back when was they were like, oh well, you're gonna get this upgrade from they probably did, like you said, intend for the Avengers of Hyjal gear to be upgradable. And so they were like, oh yeah, you don't need a belt from the raid. And then they walked back on it and nobody realized. And it is really frustrating, for sure. I know a lot of people were stuck with gear like that, and then they go into the sim and they see these things. Like, I want to say in phase 1, the issue was in the game files, there are heroic BOEs, like the BOEs that drop in Bastion and Twilight and Blackwing the Summit. There are heroic versions, but they were never implemented. And a lot of times, like we do try to catch those. Like for reference, our kind of database of items comes from Wowhead. Like, we generally take data from them and then we scrape it, do some things to like pull it into the sim. But doing that, obviously, you're going to end up with a lot of items that were never implemented. It's true in Solid, it's true in TBC, Wrath, Cata. And so like that particular one, and in general, the like heroic, what's the reputation called again?
Guardians, Avengers of Hyjal.
Yeah, so all of those, like, we are aware that they are not available, and we do have a way to like exclude it, to tell the sim like, no, they can actually obtain this, remove it from the database. We need to do it. It really comes down to like, is there someone available to do it? Like, I feel like we run into it even more in SOD. Like, there were so many times where people would like message me about like items either missing, especially because like so many items on there, Blizzard not only had items in vanilla that they never implemented, but then come SOD, you have like items getting replaced with newer versions. And for a long time, we were just kind of like, okay, let both exist in the sim. And then eventually I was like, no, like this is a really bad experience. Really going into phase 4, like there was so much molten core loot in particular that I kind of wrote a bit of an algorithm to like try and make a guess about what is a new item in SOD that, you know, replaced some vanilla item. There's like 8 different checks that it tries to do to try and match that up. And ultimately it actually gets it wrong sometimes. Like there were items in SOD too that were never implemented. And so then they end up in the sim and people are like, wait, this isn't in the game. And I go look and I'm like, well, it's a SOD item, but you know, and so it's like, it's really difficult, especially dealing with that. You know, we have to deal with Wowhead too. They occasionally have errors on their end. The actual Blizzard data does have issues too. Like one big one that we know about right now that it's been reported, we're trying to get it fixed, but a lot of Dragon Soul loot, the weapons have no damage and the armor has no armor. So the items are very much broken, and this is in like the actual database. Like something happened in their migration with Cata. I don't know what they do.
They probably just don't expect anyone to still be playing when Dragon Soul's out, so they're like, there's just no point. We won't bother putting these in.
Hey, maybe if they don't do LFR, that's a shout out. Please don't do LFR.
Oh. So do you think that it would just be kind of like a switch that you could try to find in the code somewhere that you could just say, hey, like Avengers of Hyjal loot cannot be used with Crystallized Fire to be upgraded? And it would be something kind of like that you could put something in the code to change it, to just make it where there would be no 359 eye level pieces from that reputation? Or would you have to go in, do you think, individually for all those pieces of loot and turn something off on all of that?
Yeah, it really depends. If like for what you said, if there is a way in that item data that we can connect those items together and say, all of these are these specific, you know, in this case, like the reputation gear from that particular reputation, then maybe we can do that. Otherwise, yeah, it really is a very manual, like every single item one by one. Like in our code, in our like database code, there is literally a giant list of item IDs that we're like, nope, this isn't in the game, this isn't in the game, this isn't in the game. It's very manual, very tedious. You know, we try our best, but there are so many items in the game, and ultimately, like, we also are kind of limited by like whatever data we can get. We're kind of getting data third hand or second hand, right? Like Wowhead's getting it from the game, and then we're getting it from Wowhead. So, you know, what we get can definitely be questionable.
I remember there was like the dungeon BOEs in phase 1 too, and it was like there were all 333. There was no 346 versions of the BOE blues from the dungeons. And then there was another one with like, are the world bosses,
the world boss 359s?
Were they going to have 359 or 346 versions? And Blizzard ended up saying like, hey, no, like you're not going to get the epic versions. But I know on Wowhead, it showed like that it was going to be available and all that stuff. So. Yeah,
and that's
like,
why it's not worth doing
1,
anything, is it? It just goes back to what we were saying earlier, because come PTR for Firelands, Blizzard might actually use, you know, their brain and say, well, no, we should actually have these reputation items added as, you know, items that can be used with a crystallized firestone, because there is only one intellect cape that every healer, every warlock, priest, boomy, Ellie, like every single person that uses intellect is going to want one cloak that drops. There's no other cloak option, just one. Whereas if they allow crystallized firestones to be used on the rep gear, now you've got your friendly cloak that, you know, eases that a little bit, even though crystallized firestones are going to be an absolute bitch to get. Like, that's still not going to be easy. You know, it makes sense to have that gear upgradable. but will they do it? You know, that's why taking all those items out now could be premature if they do turn around and see that there is sense in them being on there. So,
right, and you know that's kind of one of the things too, right? Is what changes are people going to be okay with? You know, what the community, like, for so long, you've got like that divide between no changes. People want what they call like a more authentic experience, and then on the flip side, like, do you change stuff for quality of life? Like in this case, you know, that would be a huge quality of life improvement for people. Another thing too is like dungeons. You know, I know, like, I personally really enjoyed the alpha, beta, gamma dungeons from Wrath, and you know, going into Cata too, like we heard a lot about like a Mythic Plus potentially style dungeon system in like surveys that were going out. Like, are we going to get anything like that? If we do, then you know that potentially also is a huge set of changes that all of a sudden we may have to account for in the sim. So
wait till we get to MOP and let's hear people crying about changes for that, because I tell you, people are not going to be happy with the fact that there's no... in MOP, they never added a tome of flying for alts. So you had to do 85 to 90 on foot every single character.
Ooh. Oh, yeah, they'll change that. I'm sure.
Oh, I can't wait to hear people cry about all the reasons why they shouldn't. But, yeah.
I've been fighting with people all day on Discord about should there be flying in Classic Plus? Like, whatever you want to call Classic Plus. And I'm like, why not? And people are just, they're so against it. It's crazy. They're like, oh, it affects world PvP. It's not fair. And I'm like, so you're saying there wouldn't be world PvP if it was just ground mounts? Like, what do you mean? Like, flying mounts equals a more unfair world PvP experience? Like, show me an example of that. And people can't do it.
Put Skyriding in it, and then you can knock people off their mounts.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's what somebody suggested. Yeah, they were like, why isn't there an item that could knock people off their mounts? And they were like, well, they just hold their spacebar for 2 seconds and they're out of range. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah, I know. Like, personally, I never really played Classic 2019. I don't feel strongly about like no changes, some authentic experience, but I never experienced it the first time around, and I'm sure that plays into it. But for me, as someone who, like, I really was mostly a retail reader until like probably more of Wrath, even Cata and Zod. Like, I played a tiny bit of tail end of TBC Classic, played like really casually in Wrath, but anything that is like a general quality of life improvement, I am always like, go for it, go crazy. You know, those new dungeons and Wrath were amazing. I love them. I feel like the game would have been really boring without them. You know, nobody wants to raid log, right? Raid logging happened in SUD, people complained. Raid logging was the thing in original Wrath, and in, you know, a lot of like later in TBC Classic, no one really played in between raids. A lot of people now in Cata, I've heard people say like, oh, I'm only raid logging. Like, me too, right? I would log on once a week on a Sunday. I'd log on like 30 minutes before raid, get consumables, and that's it. Play for a couple hours, and then I'm done for the week. And like, okay, you can play alt, but if we then get into like Firelands and Dragon Soul kind of did have catch-up gear, and but like there's only like so much you can do to like gear up your alts, right? And a lot of people like fill that gap with alt, but if it's really hard to obtain the gear, then it's like it's not that much fun, right? And I think that like plays into like what Scotty was saying earlier too, about like what you really like about retail. You know, I'll definitely agree, like the gearing system that Blizzard brought in Dragonflight in season 2 was phenomenal, absolutely wonderful. You know, it took a couple of patches to like figure out the pacing. At first, it was way too fast. Like we were all pretty much BIS geared by like week 2, 3. They slowed it down a bit. They figured out the pacing, and now like if you want to pick up an alt, there are so many ways to get gear and to get that all caught up. Like people don't generally want to do catch up, right? It's the reason they buy boots, they buy whatever sales to like get gear. They just want to play the game. People like the end game. Give them, in my opinion anyways, like give them options to do that.
I agree, and you know, not boring, monotonous options, fun options. You know, the fact that, like, I'll just go back to Delves for a second. You know, the fact that you're going to be able to get reasonably decent gear, you know, to then be able to step straight into heroic raids. But that's fantastic, and you can do that solo. You know, you've got M+, you can just do Mythic Zeros. Like, there is world events, you know, weeklies. Like, I love the fact that how you can, like, gear's not thrown at you. Like, you still need to do some stuff, but it don't just feel like, oh, I'm just going to run heroics back to back for 8 hours and then I can buy one piece of gear. It's like, you know, it just keeps you entertained. There was something I was going to say. Oh, about you liking quality of life, you know, and you accepting quality of life changes. So I look at Classic very differently to most. And again, this is a purely maybe selfish perspective, or I'm a unique case, because like I said, I've played so many so many different private servers of TBC, so many RAF, like I wouldn't say so many Cata, but 3 or 4 different Cata servers, multiple MOP servers. You know, like every new fresh there is, I'm there for at least the first phase of content, like more or less without fail. Like Blizzard should almost see Classic now, maybe not when it was 2019 and it was vanilla, because, you know, that was all about like, you know, authenticity and it being like, yeah, Classic, yeah, proper vanilla again. But I think we've reached a point now where that gang has gone. Like those people. It
hasn't, Scotty. It hasn't. Let me tell you.
What? They're not still playing Cata, are they? You'll have people that play Cata private servers that have now come to here, and you know they want it how it is. I'm not saying there's none of them. There will still be some of them. But Blizzard should be using it as a second chance. Like they should be like, what fouled with Cata? Not enough raid content. Too raid loggy. It was an unfinished expansion. Yeah, you know, all of those things, and then putting that in. Like, who's gonna actually say no? We don't want more content. Like, who are these people that would actually say that? The same with MOP. There's certain things with MOP that absolutely could do with addressing. Now MOP is a very different because it's got so much content. Like, you cannot run out of it. Well, if you was to play like 10, 12 hours a day every day, like, don't get me wrong, you'd probably run out of things to do. But there is loads of things that you can do if you're willing to go and do them. But Cata, we always knew, was going to be where it is now. We're all just logging on for 2 hours. And it's not going to change, because when Phase 3 comes out, we're only getting 7 bosses. Like, it's not a lot, and no one's going to want to go back to Tier 11. Like, not like the guilds that have been clearing heroic Tier 11 week in, week out. Once Firelands is out, they're not going to want to go back. And we've got so much loot coming from 25-man, and even doing 10-man is not that hard to gear up and get full BIS, that there's going to be no reason to go back either. Like, Cata will stay quite stale after the first 3 or 4, maybe let's say 6 weeks, to be generous, 6 weeks of each phase. Blizzard should see that, and they should be like, what can we do? Heroic Plus, they spoke about it at BlizzCon. We still have heard nothing. They've missed the boat with, in my opinion, now they've missed the boat with Heroic Plus. Like, it needed to come with Zolgarb and Zolaman, or it's just not worth it.
I think it could come out in Phase 3 and still be good. I think the Mythic Plus, the Alpha, Beta, Gamma dungeons, I'd be fine with that, because it was used to kind of give the tier pieces from the previous gear or the previous phase. So if it gave the normal tier, even if it was heroic tier, I'd be fine with that in like Phase 3. If any tier dropped from an Alpha, BRC or something like that, like, bring it on. Give me extra loot for my ults. I would actually have an ult maybe at that point. I don't have an ult right now in Cata. I've got my main Boomy, and that's it. I've got one tuned in Sod, one tuned in Cata. Like Sod ults is just not approachable because I'd have to get all the runes again. The leveling process is nice because there's bonus XP. Like I like that, but there's a lot of classic enthusiasts that are like, you shouldn't have bonus XP. Classic Plus should take a long time to level up, and I feel like that was a big turn off for people in phase 4 too that were trying to come back from phase 3, and they were like, it's going to take too long to get to 60. I'm just not even going to play. And there was even bonus XP to get to 60. But yeah, like it needs to be more approachable. I feel like too, Scotty.
But back to your Cata comment about like catch up gear. You get that. Like, in all fairness, it could actually be more difficult to get with how ridiculously high the Valor cap goes to now it rolls. But obviously, all of the Valor gear is going to go for Justice points, so you can farm that in regular heroics. So all they actually need to do is just add the tier head and shoulders to the Justice point vendor. Job's done. You can literally get more or less. You could even chuck on like normal bell, you know, a normal bell, normal. I don't know, Feralian's mirror, you know, all the trinkets, all the normal trinkets, just put it on for Justice points so you can get a full set of 359 gear just from doing heroics. I just feel like you're already nearly there. When you think about the slots that you can't fill from the Valor vendor right now, there ain't that many.
Put the essence from Alakir in the Titan Rune dungeons, whatever you want to call them. So you can pick whatever tier piece you want. You do your alpha dungeon, your alpha heroic, and it's like, hey, I got this piece now. I can go to a vendor and pick out whatever 5 piece of tier that I want to have.
Yeah, I'm at the point with Cata where, like, honestly, if they added some weird alpha type dungeon and every boss drops heroic loot from tier 11, I just don't think it matters. Yeah, as in, like, do it. I'm not saying like it don't matter as in don't do it. I mean, just do it. Yeah, like. But I personally feel like Cata's got a natural catch-up system in place every time a new phase of content comes out where you can get all the old gear for Justice points, and then you get those hard-to-get slots from the BOEs, as in, like, the bracers, which are quite difficult to get for every class in Cata. You'll be able to get that with Valor points, you know, during Firelands. And then you've got your reps, you know, you'll be able to do Molten Front to get 365 gear. Like, I just feel like there's a lot of ways to get catch-up gear anyway, just naturally baked into the game. But at the same time, if they wanted to just give everybody that does these new 5-man heroics full 372 and chuck Sinestra loot in there, I literally don't care. Like, just why not?
What if it was all non-statted pieces, kind of like you would get from the Darkmoon Fair, but it was just for transmog? So you could get your tier 11 loot from a Titan Rune Alpha.
It's got no stats on.
Yeah, no stats on it, but it was just for transmog. So you could transmog all your gear that you got in phase 3 with that gear. You know, I don't know. It would just add to your transmog collection without having to do the raid, you know?
I will say, I think, like, to Scotty's point, one of the things that I remember about the Titan Rune dungeons was how some of them were miserable. Like, they were not balanced. The affixes in some of them, it was like people do a route, right? And generally, you would, if you didn't have guildies, it was like, okay, which ones do I avoid? I remember, like, Violet Hold, Nexus, Oculus, but they'd like spawn the images.
Yeah, mirror images.
Awful in pugs. If you did Utgard Keep and Pinnacle, like every pack, like half your group's dead from standing and stuff.
Yeah, the tank would.
If you're a healer, healing those dungeons was awful. Absolutely miserable. Like, I think Scotty makes a really good point. Like, Valor is the thing.
Don't tell him that.
I won't listen.
Yeah. Don't tell him he's got a good point.
Carry on, please. Ignore him. He's an idiot.
Yeah, really. Like, you know, that the Valor catch-up is there. The Justice catch-up is there. The rep is there. You can, you know, I imagine like normal Firelands is hopefully fairly approachable for the average player. I do still hope that, I know like one of the big points of contention has been, are we going to get pre-nerf Firelands or post-nerf? And I think that's going to be a really big point too. Like in Classic, people have been going in and blowing through raid content day one. It definitely was a step up in like ICC and now with tier 11, but I think a lot of people are really also looking for something more competitive and something to keep them occupied. But I also think it's kind of a learned mentality again, right? Like a lot of us were very used to like all the content's face roll. It's really easy. People will talk like, oh, Sunwell is really hard. Not really. Nax is really hard. Not like vanilla. Not really. Old War. And then finally like ICC actually was kind of hard. And a lot of people were miserable. A lot of people really didn't like that because they were very used to going in with their like, quote unquote, like dad guild and like clearing stuff, having a good time. And I definitely think like that is important. Like I've been in both very hardcore guilds and very casual guilds. And when you're in a casual guild, if you're going in and wiping for 3 hours, you're probably not having a lot of fun. But for the people who want more challenge, I think I hope that we'll at least get pre-nerf Firelands so that, like you said, it's only a 7 boss raid tier. If people go in day one and clear it and it's no big deal, like that content becomes irrelevant immediately. And all of a sudden, like all people care about is either getting to full abyss and parsing or maybe playing an alt, or they just go play something else.
So the really, I know I've said this before, but the funny thing is about Firelands is if we get post-nerf, it will, outside of Ragnaros, so just use the first 6 bosses, they will be easier than Sinestra and Nef. I mean, Sinestra's easy anyway, but they will be easier than Nef. Like, because tier 11 never got nerfed. Like, tier 11 Heroic had hot fixes, but it was never, when tier 12 comes out, tier 11 never got nerfed, historically. It stayed the same level of difficulty on Heroic for when tier 12 launched, when tier 13 launched, when MOP launches. It was never touched. So I was reading like a historic MMO champion thread of people complaining that when tier 12 did get nerfed, they was doing Firelands and clearing, up to Rag, doing 6 or 7 Heroic, and still couldn't kill Nef. Like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine if we actually get a post-nerf Firelands where it's easier than the content that we've just been doing?
I remember you saying that because somebody stopped by the stream last night and they were like, dude, my guild's falling apart. Like, it's about to disband. We're only 9 out of 13 Heroic right now. And I was like, well, next phase, you're going to be able to get 6 out of 7, like, Heroic a lot easier than, Sinestra and Nef, like you were saying. So it's like, I know there's guilds falling apart right now because tier 11 is too hard for some guilds. So I don't know about the pre-nerf tier 12. I want to go in there and smash it. I just want to go and get my loot.
Well, tier 12 is, like, you've got tier 12, which is 6 or 7, and then you've got tier 12.5, which is Nef. And I genuinely mean that. Like, it is a tier. If we was to get pre-nerf, even if we get post-nerf, like, Nef is a tier in itself, the same way as the Lich King was. It was up until the Lich King, even with 0% buff, it was difficult. It was harder than what we'd been doing, but then the Lich King was a different level compared to the other bosses, and this is exactly the same. But I mean, I agree with you. I don't think people who play Classic particularly for the health of the game, there needs to be easy options. I think the problem is that with Classic, everyone watches YouTubers, they watch streamers, they see them clearing content, and everybody expects to be able to do it and to get all of that gear. Whereas I feel like there's a lot more self-acceptance in retail where people are like, having fun, even if they're only doing normal or they're only doing heroic. You know, they may never ever like kill a mythic boss, but they're still really enjoying the game, and they'll play through the entire expansion because there's so much more to do outside of that clearing, you know, the raid on mythic and getting the absolute best gear. I just wish there was a bit more of that in classic, like a bit bridging the gap a little bit between normal and heroic, where like there is a very, very clear difference. Like normal tier 11 is an absolute joke. Like it's not even content in my opinion. And then tier 11 heroic is actually, you know, it's difficult. You know, like if you chuck you know an average guild into the raid who's never seen it before, and then they're progressing, it will take months before they get 13 or 13 heroic. But then normal, when you're like, oh, we've been wiping, you know, over and over again on, I don't know, let's say council heroic, let's switch it to normal. Now all of a sudden it is just the disparity between the two is just far too big. Like but maybe then so is the gear. Like, so those being brought a little bit closer together, where normal is still accessible to the vast majority of people, but a little bit more rewarding than it is, so you don't feel forced to have to bang your head against the wall constantly to get heroic bosses down. I don't know. I've not got the answer, but retail clearly has, because retail actually does it really well.
Do the crystallized fire drop in normal
No.
in Firelands? See, if I feel like that could be a change that would help bridge that little gap there. Because if the normal dad guild could go in there and do normal mode, but still be able to get that 391 eye level gear from getting their crystallized stuff, giving it to whoever you needed it to have to carry your raid. Was it the healer? Was it the tank? Was it the DPS that needed the extra boost to get you to the heroic kill? That'd be huge. Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad idea. But they also should up the drop rate of it massively, because
I've heard it's low.
Yeah, it's like 10%. I mean, 10%, 7 bosses. Some weeks you won't see 1. You know,
exactly. Yeah.
At the most you might see a week is 2, even if you was lucky. So, and again, there's going to be so many. Every shaman, druid, paladin, you know, like anyone who uses a relic is going to want a firestone, because it's the only way that you can get your bis, you know, obviously your bis relic, as well as, you know, there'll be plenty of people like ferals that are unlucky and haven't seen Fandrel's flame scythe that want to upgrade Rancir. Like, there's loads of uses for them, but there's just not enough of them for how many uses there actually are. You could, in heroic, you could literally have 1 drop, like, from every boss, or like, you know, at least a decent chance, maybe 50% chance from each boss.
Yeah.
Because I think by the time we get through Firelands, even if that was the case, I bet you still have people that need them.
All right, Lucy, I got to ask you about the Reforge suggestion on the WOWSIMS. Let's get back to WOWSIMS here for a little bit. I like the little tangent that we had there, talking about some WoW. But there's a suggest Reforge button that you can click on in the Cata sim. Is that kind of the same thing as using Reforge Lite, the add-on in game, or like how are those different from each other, or are they kind of the same sort of feature?
Yeah, so I think they're probably about the same in terms of like what you're doing with it. Personally, I've actually never used Reforge Lite. I always just go into the sim, use the Reforge, and then do it manually. But you know, it was definitely like, when we had people asking us for a feature like that, it was always, when are we getting Reforge Lite in the sim? And so, like, yeah, it is very comparable. It was created by our developer, Nerd Egghead, and is very wonderful. It's also like I think one place that it does kind of go beyond what Reforge Lite can do is not only is this tool like looking at your stats, looking at, you know, kind of those like predefined stat weights for what to pick, but you know, for a lot of specs, you make more complicated decisions about gearing. Namely, like, hard caps and soft caps. And if anyone is like not familiar, a hard cap is pretty much like there's a point where a certain amount of a stat, either has very minimal benefit or absolutely none at all, to the point that you no longer want that stat on your gear. The weight of that stat goes to 0. It's dead. You don't care. A great example of this was like Elemental Shaman in Wrath of the Lich King. In Ice Crown Citadel, you would stack haste until your lightning bolt went below 1 second during cooldowns, during like Lust and other cooldowns. Beyond that, haste was pretty much useless because your global cooldown is capped to 1 second. You can't go below. And so any haste beyond that, you're losing a ton of value, and you start to want to put your stats, elsewhere. The other one, soft caps, is a bit trickier, I think, for most people. You can kind of think of it as like gearing is the weight of stats, it's like a wave in many cases, where especially if you have like dots or like I know certain, I think like a Warlock Mastery maybe, there are like thresholds where in general the stat is maybe worth a little bit like a normal secondary, but there's a cutoff because of some mechanic with your spec, whether it's like getting another tick of a dot or I don't really know. I don't personally play any of the specs that use it, but those do often make an impact too. And so we have also built that into the Suggest Reforge tool for specs where it matters. And so like at a base value, the average player can go in, import your character, click Suggest Reforge. It will run a sim and try to figure out like what your best distribution is. If you're trying to, nitpick a bit, if you're one of those specs who does run into caps, you can click on the cog icon, and then it'll pop up a lot more options in there for you that you can start, really tweaking some of those things. We do have some like recommendations by default as well, but it does give you a lot more granular control over like what you can do with your gearing.
Mm-hmm.
So how about in MOP we're gonna get pet battles? Is there gonna be a pet battle WoW sim?
That would be a really fun project. Have you tried Pokemon?
Yeah, I play Pokemon Go daily.
Dang, wait, is that a pun?
No. I wish it was. Like, I wish I got like a little kickback every time somebody says Pokemon Go, and I'm like, hey, that's $1. They're like, thank you. But it's same with the coding. Like, I need to get some coding like kickback every time somebody says, yeah, I code with Go.
Royalties.
Pay me. Yeah, pay me. There's another feature, the batch feature that has new in brackets next to it. I've never used it. I'm assuming you can pick multiple pieces from the same item slot and kind of sim them against each other at the same time. Is that kind of what the batch feature is?
Yeah, so the batch sim is a concept. If anyone has used raid bots, they have a tool called Top Gear where you can import your character, and you can also include all of your bag items to then, or you can like pick other items like within the UI, and you can make selections for like simming. Let's say I've got like 2 different helmets, 3 different trinkets, a couple different weapons. You can make those selections and then run a sim, and it will then go in, try all of those different combinations, and then spit out results to you saying, with this combination, you got like this much DPS, with this one, you got this much. And so the original concept was kind of started during Wrath, but was never released. It was pretty rough around the edges. Started by one of the original developers of WOWSIMS. But we often like get people asking for this kind of tool because it's immensely helpful. When I'm on retail, almost all of the sims that I do are top gear, equivalent to batch sim, because maybe you change one item, but then that changes your entire set of stats, right? So all of a sudden, like maybe you've dropped below hit cap. Yeah, you can also reforge back to it. But what if I also have like different items in my bags that maybe would actually be a better combination? So we really wanted to give that functionality to users. And I would still call it experimental. One of the real big things that I think we're missing right now that like we are very well aware of is the sim right now cannot reforge those combinations. And that's just like a technical limitation because of the way like all of the reforge code is written. So unfortunately, like, there is still an issue on Cata specifically where like it may recommend something to you, but you pick it and then you reforge and all of a sudden like, well, actually like maybe a different combination would have been better. And that is definitely not ideal. I wish personally that I had more time to work on it because things like that. And then, there are also some issues with like the performance of it, particularly on the website. You can, if anyone doesn't know, there is a like little icon in the top right that you can download a desktop version of the sim and it will run on your computer. And it will take like full advantage of your hardware, run much quicker. You can definitely like, if you want to batch sim, I highly recommend doing that. You'll be able to get a lot more use out of it, I think. Yeah, it's definitely, it's experimental. It was really complicated to get up and running. And, I think there's still work to be done, but we talked about removing it and then people were like, no, please, like, I don't care. I still like this feature. Like, even if like reforging might skew the results of it, like you can always go through, click one, try a reforge, see how it goes, try a different combination. Like people are still using it and telling me like, we want this feature. And so we're leaving it there. And I'm also hoping to get time to bring it to SOD because right now we don't exist in SOD. It's an experimental feature, but I tell people like, please don't use it. It is not really functional. It's not supported in SOD right now. Like I want to bring those updates over to the SOD website to make it available. But just please know, like, if you're going to use it, you're probably going to run into bugs right now, so don't be surprised.
So what kind of data can you see as a dev for WOWSIMS? Can you see how many people have simmed per class? Is there any sort of data like that, or like how many downloads of the tool, like per expansion, like how many Cata downloads for the sim that you've gotten, or how many SOD downloads that you've gotten? Is there any like back-end data like that you can see that somebody like me that just goes to the website can't?
I'm honestly not entirely sure. I know, like, for example, we do not do any kind of like tracking of like what you're doing on the site. People, when you click sim, we're not like tracking you as a metric. We're not like taking any. I mean, there's not really much data to take anyways, but this is like a fully, open source, open code project. And like downloads, unless there's some way on like the site that we like host our code on where like the download is from, unless they have something, then like we have no way to really know that. We do like the only thing we really have is like Google Analytics to be able to see like how many people are like coming to the page. You know, I know I've not checked in a while, but like there were like tens of thousands of monthly users. And I know now we also have a version running for China as well that a very passionate player who, when NetEase announced like that WoW would be coming back to China, they were like, we really want WOWSIMS. And one of the issues is like they block a lot of websites in China and in other regions. And so they ended up like porting the site over to like a Chinese version. They built a new like database because like they also cannot access Wowhead. And they got like a fully functional site going for them. And now as like they're back in, I think like ICC or something, wherever like they left off.
That's really cool.
Sick.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, because I've had somebody that reached out to me a couple of years ago, and they were like, "Hey, do you mind if I like dub your videos? Like I make Balance Druid videos." They were like, "Do you mind if I dub your videos in like Chinese or whatever?" And I was like, "Dude, go for it." Yeah. So it's cool that there's kind of like a country, like a language barrier that's getting like crossed there, and we're helping each other out. I like that. Let's see here. The batch feature. Yep, talked about that. The new results tab. That was another one. That's been updated a little bit. If you sim your gear and you have your results, you go to the results tab. It looks a little different now. So, what inspired that change for the results tab to look a little different?
Yeah. So we actually shipped that feature, I believe, yesterday, and I was not. The only thing I was involved with was pitching the idea. All of the credit to Let's, who's one of our awesome developers, very passionate about UI. We, despite all of like the UI revamp that happened over the last 2 years, one of the places that I know I was kind of intimidated by was the results tab. There's a lot of data that ends up getting piled there, and just for the people who used it before, or if you're still using it on the SOD site where we've not ported those changes over yet, like it's a little rough around the edges, right? I will fully admit that there were things that I didn't like about it. There's a lot of text, very difficult to kind of look at and like quickly get a glance of like what you really need to know. And so internally, we talked about this for like, this experience really isn't great. And I remember like I was looking at Warcraft logs thinking like people, like how many people are using Warcraft logs, right? Like hundreds of thousands of players probably. And people like know this experience, they know what this looks like. And we have a similar concept, but pretty much all of us could agree like it was not as good, not as like visually appealing, not as useful. And so we said, okay, let's try and use Warcraft logs as an inspiration and change up our UI to provide a better experience. Like now you can get like the like bars like showing how much damage is being done, gives you a better idea of like what portion of your damage is each ability doing. We also cleaned up a lot of the metrics around like misses, for example, or like breakdowns on like how much damage like the average cast is doing. Things like that cannot be broken down into like normal hits, crits. You can break down like your misses into like, was it a miss? Was it a dodge, block, parry? Things like that. So definitely, just inspired by, we want to provide a better experience for people. And we had an idea, and one of our developers was awesome enough to go in and do it as a passion project, because that's mostly what this tool, this website is like we're people who like to play the game. We're really passionate about it. We like to code too. And we do it because we enjoy it.
Oh, I'm muted. I think it looks great. Yeah, really super clean. And yeah, I mean, it's like looking at details, isn't it? Now or something, just a big version of details, which is great. As I said earlier on, like it is extremely user friendly, like and as someone who's recently gone back to retail, like raid bots, it can be very overwhelming. You're looking at raid bots, and it's even though it's once you get used to it, it's great. Like it works, it does what it's meant to, and all of that. But when I was looking at it first, I was like, man, like what is even going on here? Whereas you go on WOWSIMS and it's like, oh, cool. Pick your gear, press sim. Job's a good one.
All right, so I know there's not really like PR right now, right? Like you're not really limited to what you can say or anything like that. So if I'm out of line here, just tell me. But are there any projects that you're working on right now, or any developers are working on, like improvements like this that might be in the works that could take a couple of months to get finished, that you can tell us about, that we might be able to see in October, November, or something like that when Firelands comes out?
Apart from the pet battle sim that you've already confirmed.
Yeah, obviously that's going to be live as soon as Mob launches day one.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I'm aware right now, full honesty, like I don't know of any big projects coming down the pipeline. I mean, we really had two big ones recently, like with the results. I mean, the batch sim, I think I built that back in like June or something, and then Nerd Egghead also just shipped like a huge like rewrite of the way that we like store stats internally on the Cata site. It was like still kind of like the old system, and then Cata, the original game with Cata, Blizzard like completely revamped the stat system. And so he like just shipped, a huge update there. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, like no huge cool features coming right now, unfortunately.
The features that have come recently have been huge, like that. I still haven't even used most of them, so I need to get caught up and start using the ones that just came out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We are starting, or I should say, Lutz is starting to port those results changes over to the solid sim. So I'm going to work with him to make sure that everything's working there. I don't have an exact timeline. He literally started today, but it's always easier to I think build it once and then port it over. All of these versions of the site, there is a TBC one if you've ever used it, the Wrath one, the Cata side, they're all completely separate from one another. And so a lot of times when we do build big things like this, we end up having to not only copy the changes over, but a lot of times there are nuances to it that, from the different versions of the game that we do have to be careful with. For example, porting it to SOD, all of a sudden we have to think about partial resistances. That's a metric that didn't, as far as I'm aware, doesn't exist in Cata. That is a thing in SOD. I could be totally wrong. I don't know.
Be because resist is one of my pet peeves, and I hate it. And I think that there still is partial resist in Cata. I'm gonna double check while you keep going. Go ahead.
I'm pretty much done.
Scott, you got anything else?
No, I've just updated the description for anybody who's watching back or watching live to link your WOWSIMS Patreon as well, because Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that all of this work that goes on is free, and so many, tens of thousands, like you said, of people that use this, and probably heavily rely on it as well. So, I would just heavily recommend that, you just pledge on Patreon, something that you can afford. I'm sure no matter how small of a value, it's going to go a long way. Because we need to keep Lucy and obviously the rest of the WoWSIMS team actually doing this for many, many years to come. Because WoW Classic in some way, shape or form is not going anywhere. Yes, we know we're going to get MUP. Do we get WOD? I don't know. But are we going to get Classic Plus? Are we going to get, there's always going to be something WoW related that isn't retail that needs, tools like this and people supporting tools like this as well. So that was all I wanted to add.
Yeah. And building off of that, if there were to be a Classic Plus, I would assume that there would be a WoWSIMS for that. Would you work on something like that if that were to come out and it was something completely different than SOD?
I'm sure we probably have plenty of people on the team who would be very interested. I know for me, like, SOD appealed to me very much because it's a big stray from vanilla. Personally, I think if I were to play a Classic Plus, it would highly depend on what it actually entails. Like, I personally, Ellie Shaman main, Ellie is terrible in vanilla. Please, if we have Classic Plus, give us some, at least like enough changes to make every spec viable. It doesn't need to be like SOD level, but that'd be really nice. But it really ultimately comes down to whether our developers are playing and motivated. I would like to think that we would. If I have the bandwidth, like, I probably would at least try it at the very least. But yeah, like right now, like, SOD takes up so much of my time. Yeah, like going into phase 4, I think I was probably working, like, through the PTR period, like I was probably working on the sim like 16 hours a day or so, 12, 16 hours a day, like pretty much like a day job on top of my normal day job. So
yeah, I know anytime I would shoot you a message on Discord, like, hey, I found something wrong on the sim or something, like, is this working correctly or something? It didn't matter what time of day. Like, I'd be up at a DGen hour, like 4 a.m. my time, and you would respond, and I was like, what, is she still up? Like, what? I was expecting like a message back in the morning. Like, it didn't matter. Like, I would send you a message, and you were like on top of things. Like, it was crazy. So let me just try to boost you up a little bit here. Trice said, people who make the WoWSIMS are legends. Thank you for your hard work. We had another person, Tarkus, can't overstate how good the sim looks. Too simplified, clean UI helps ease a lot of people in. So like, there's been people, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the chat, but like, people throughout our discussion have been like praising you guys. So thank you for your work. And Scotty, is there anything else that you wanted to try to talk about?
No, I think I'm good. That was really insightful. Really, a really good conversation. I enjoyed it. Thanks for coming, Lucy. And just one thing I want to leave you with, because you really did beat around the bush a minute ago when you was talking about Classic Plus. You can openly say vanilla's dog shit. Like, it's fine. We're all friends here, because I'm the same. Like, Classic Plus would have to have wildly different play styles, wildly better systems in place for me to even consider playing it. Because like, vanilla, just slow, boring, dated. Like, it's not for me. I can't wait to get shit in the comments for that.
It's funny. Like, I didn't play vanilla, but obviously, like, working on especially WoWSIMS SOD, like, I've interacted with a lot of people who are very passionate about vanilla. Played it. They tell me about also my guildies, like awesome guildies on SOD. Tell me about it. Like, I hear a lot of people complain. People tell me, like, I know in SOD, like, early on, people were like, we really want 40-player rating. And then they released 20-player, and like half the game quit, half the player base quit. My own guild, I lost 2 guilds in SOD phase 3. part of it was switch to 20. Part of it was the lack of other things to do and raid tuning. But I talked to other people, like, for example, someone who led a guild in vanilla or classic 2019. He's like, I would never do this again. Like, managing 40 players is awful. You know, I think it's okay to enjoy memories about things too and about what they were, but even if we try to perfectly recreate like the gameplay, ultimately, like, we do live in a different era of gaming. Like, part of the big thing then was you didn't know things, and nowadays we know everything. You can find every meta optimization. You can find everything about like your sod runes, like how to play your class. The Sims exist, and that didn't exist back then, right? Those things, you know, they coexist, and you know, I think it's great to have both experiences for players. I'm really glad that Blizzard left like the era servers around. I'm really glad we got hardcore. Like, I actually played hardcore. It's like the one thing that actually made vanilla kind of fun to me, you know. But I hope with Classic Plus that even if they don't go as crazy as like in SOD, I do hope that we can at least get some level of quality of life improvements for, you know, maybe the people who aren't as interested in like the original vanilla experience, but still want to be able to play it.
Yeah, and class, you know, being able to play any class you want without, you know, it being 30 warriors in a raid, and yeah, like, I'm 100% with you.
And I was just looking finally, and I don't see any partial resist in Cata, so I'm glad, because I finally did my first molten core the other day. I don't remember what day it was, but it felt fine with 20. Going back to 40 though, I was one that was like 40 is a hard no for me. Like, I don't want to do molten core at all if it's 40, but 20 didn't feel that bad. The one part that did kind of feel bad was we had too many people on the druid token, because we had like warriors, rogues, like druids in the raid, and it was just like, well, half the raid is on this one token. I got 2 pieces of tier in one run though, so that was cool.
Nice.
Like,
Man, you're complaining.
I'm glad I went in there. I know. Well, I rolled on 6 pieces, so like I should have had.
You
at
should
least
have had
3.
6.
Like, I need a I need at least 50% or better on my rolls, man. If Toep would have dropped and I lost the roll on Toep, then I would have been fuming. But nah, like, it was cool to get 2-piece. I didn't wear 2-piece because it's Thorns damage. Like, are you joking? But
Cool.
Yeah, I really enjoy SOD Phase 4. I really enjoy Molten Core. Also, if anyone is like on the fence about it, if you used to play SOD and you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna enjoy it again, Phase 4 is really good. Like, there was so much to do there. There was so much like character progression. I literally do not play alts, and I have found a way to like log in and progress my character still pretty much every day. Like, it's a lot of fun. The raid is great. I love the multiple difficulties. Like, please, if you were like a former SOD player who quit, give it a shot. Like, I am biased because like I like when people like use the sim and like interact with it, but you know, I do really think like Blizzard takes feedback to heart and has tried to make actionable improvements, and they're not going to build a perfect game every time, but they do take that feedback. They try to improve. They try, you know, whether it's SOD, whether it's Cata, whether it's retail, like, it does come eventually, and it is still a game. And you know, ultimately, if you're not enjoying it, don't play it. But if you had a bad experience once, you still might enjoy it later.
all right, so your job right now is to convince Scotty, because he's somebody that you're talking to right now. Somebody that played SOD, no lifed it, had 8 ults in Phase 1, had only 4 ults in Phase 2, and now is completely off of SOD. And he's playing War Within, and you're both playing like retail stuff right now. So what would you choose if you had to pick one or the other, Lucy? Would it be SOD or would it be War Within?
You can't do that. to
Oh,
me.
I was like, if it's Sod,
Too much
then you
pressure.
got to tell Scotty why Sod's better. But
Like, the thing is that I don't really like to compare the different versions of WoW because I play them all for a different reason. Like, I enjoyed Sod, I enjoyed Cata and Wrath, I enjoy Retail. I don't enjoy them because they're the same. I enjoy them because they're different and they all provide a different experience. Like Retail, I do cutting edge raiding. Like it's stressful, high dopamine. You know, I remember like grinding like dozens to well over 100 keys just to like get best gear on my shaman during Dragonflight in a single season. And then, you know, you're like going through and wiping like 300 times, 400 or 500 times on a boss. It's not always fun. By the way, I hate Tindril Staghelm. I played on PTR and I was like, this boss is going to be terrible. And then it was. And some people like it, but I hate it. Yeah, like, I don't know. I just don't like comparing them. They're different. They're different games.
Yeah,
That's
and I
what
don't
makes
think
them
you
different.
should. I don't think you should compare them. Like the thing is, you pay one sub and you get them all. So enjoy as many of them as possible. And this is the thing. Like, you know, I'm quite open. As I say, I haven't done a retail video for probably 2 or 3 years, and I've done 2 retail videos in the last like couple of days. But it's because it's what I'm enjoying at the moment. Does it mean I'm not playing Classic? No, I've been on Cataclysm today. I'll be on Cata tomorrow. I was raiding last night. Like, you know, but there will be those times where one of them is appealing to me more, because at the moment Cata's just raid logging. So I'm like loving the War Within hype and can't wait to do everything War Within's got. But then I'm sure when Firelands comes out, now I'm going to be spending more time on Cata again rather than retail, and I'll be like focusing more on Cata videos. And then once that's on farm and all we're doing is logging in for an hour a week, it might be sod. Like, you know, if there's not that much going on retail at the time, you know, it could then be Season of Discovery again for me. Like, you know, it's just, yeah, it just depends what I'm enjoying at the time. And at the moment, it's primarily retail, then Cata, and sod would be absolute last. But I've said all along, if they launch a version of a Karazhan raid at some point, no matter what the raid size is, 10 or 20 man, I will literally say, right, go, what server you on? I'll create a character, I will get to max level, I will get geared up, and I will go and raid it. You know, like, I already know that I'll do that. But I'm not interested in Molten Core again, Blackwing Lair again, AQ again, like all of that shit. Like, I've done it more, like, if I never saw it ever again, like, that would still be too soon. Like, it's shit.
yeah, that's why I've only done it once. And they made the changes where it's the SOM mechanics, and it wasn't that bad. Like, I pugged it. It was Monday night, so it was like night before reset. I want to say we didn't wipe. It was heat level 1. Like, it was a pretty fun like raid. It took about 3 hours, but it was pretty fun to go back in there. But yeah, if I want to do Molten Core, I can always go in there and Cata and solo it and like get my experience that way. Like, oh yeah, cool, it's Molten Core.
Yeah. All right, I'm done, go. And I'm sure Lucy probably wants to get away from you as well. So
I know there's a blurry little, I'm assuming it's a cat that's going around because I have a cat, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, the cat's looking for some petting. So
cool. Well,
No,
Lucy, thanks for coming on. Like, it was honestly really, as I say, really insightful. Yeah, just enjoyed the conversation.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun tonight, and you know, I'm really glad that we have so many people like who are also passionate about like learning more about The Sims, and you know, for all the people who do use it, and I'm sure I interact with quite a few people who are going to watch this, probably very frequently. Like, thank you for like your support too. Like, the biggest thing that keeps me motivated is people just saying that they really enjoy using it. Like, you know, if people are unhappy, like, I want to know, I want to try and fix it. But you know, just the gratification from that alone is like more than enough to motivate me, and I think a lot of our developers too.
Yeah, and like Scotty said, he's gonna put in the description how to support everybody, all the devs on Patreon. You stream on Twitch. Can people sub to you on Twitch if people wanted to support you directly? Is there any way to do that?
I do. I stream at twitch.tv/Lucenia, LUCENIA. And if you're gonna watch, I hope you like Ellie Shaman, because it's pretty much all I play. Sorry.
Hey, you got to start streaming some Boomkin stuff, and I'll head over there and check out some streams.
Cool.
Maybe,
yeah, that's all in the
ever add
description.
us to Pro.
Yeah, your Twitch is in the description.
Awesome.
Patreon's in the description.
Cool. Thank you.
Are there any spots that could be filled on the Sims team? Are there certain specs that need like a developer to try to hop on board?
Yeah, I mean, especially on SOD, like we really lost a lot of developer interest going into phase 4, or like really coming out of phase 3. So like it's definitely been a lot of work. I think a bit too much for me on my own. So not on my own, like we do still have a few people who contribute a bit, but you know, if you know any amount of programming, if you're passionate about WoW and just want to like do something a bit different, have like a little side project, if you want to interact with really awesome and passionate communities, like sorry, my cat knocked something into the sink. Like please, you know, feel free to like stop by in our Discord. We have people all the time who just show up and they're like, how can I help? And you know, they'll go work on something. They, you know, they'll ask questions to kind of like learn how to do the things. And you know, there's plenty of existing examples too that like you can look at. And you know, like I mentioned earlier, like it's pretty friendly, I like to think. So especially in SOD, if you're interested, please stop by. I would love more developers to help out because it's a lot of work, and you know, I'm gonna keep doing it, but more people is always helpful.
Sweet, yeah. I stopped. I tried to take some gaming and simulation was the name of the college course that I was trying to take, and I got to C++, and I was like, nah, this ain't for me. Like the coding and trying to figure out where the bugs were at that point, like just looking at a screen and that's all you could see was the code. I was like, nah. I tried to do some like web design too, and it was just like, so like not for me. But I know it's something that a lot of people enjoy doing. So
He was looking at it like, I can't fix this with a screwdriver. What's going on?
yeah, I'm a mechanic, like a wrench turner. You know, like I gotta see what I'm looking at here. So yeah, I wish that I could get involved in that. I feel like I'm doing something though. You know, I'm telling you, hey, this is broken,
Yeah.
and then asking you like, how can we fix this? So like I like being that part of the project. You know.
The complainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's broken. What are you doing?
Cool. All right.
Well,
we can start.
Like
oh,
every
sorry,
time, like every time, sorry, Scotty, like every time Go DMs me, he's like, Lucy, I'm so sorry, I know you're busy, but there's like this thing, so many people do that. Like, please don't feel bad. Like the people who do report things and like do testing for us, you're awesome. You're equally as important because you're not testing it, then I have to. And that's really hard, really time consuming. So thank you.
And like Q just said in chat, she's a legend to this community. Thank you so much for all you do. So yeah, thanks again for joining us today. I hope we can have you back at some point in the future when there's a new breakthrough version of WOWSIMS. When the pet battles get implemented, then we'll have you back on and be like, hey, thanks for doing the dev work on the pet battles.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Lucy, for coming on. Thank you, Go, for whatever you've done. And
I set it up. What do you mean? What do you mean? Whatever I've done, I got this going.
yeah, I just turned up. To be fair,
did all the work.
He really did. I literally just turned up like 10 minutes before and said hello. Like, I'm here. I've got nothing prepared as usual, but unfortunately, like I told both of these before we started, school holidays are not good. Anyone who's a parent and your kids are off school at the moment, you know how difficult it is to just to get anything done. So that's my excuse,
my
and I'm
kid,
sticking to it.
My kid goes back to school next Monday. So I've been doing the same thing, Scotty. I know how you feel. But thanks everybody for joining us. Are we going to be back anytime soon, Scotty? Is there anything that you wanted to talk about on Saturday? Should we have a show? Or?
September, mate. I'm going on holiday, aren't I, on Saturday?
September.
So yeah, we won't have one next week. We'll do one the week after. We could do one on like the Wednesday the week after. Maybe do a bit of Firelands digging. Maybe have a look at gearing options. We can fire WOWSIMS up while we're on there to look at different item options and stuff. And yeah, I think we should do that because speed. We touched on a few bits tonight with like there only being one caster cloak, not being a 391 belt. It would actually be quite good to have a podcast, get a couple of different different classes on. Like maybe get Subtle on so he can sort of cover tanks. I'll cover melee DPS. You'll be doing caster DPS. We'll get a healer. Maybe get Willie on. And yeah, maybe look at something like that. That would be interesting.
All right, cool. Lucy, thanks again for joining us. And maybe in 2 weeks we'll be back with another show on the 4th. And I've got a rogue, Scotty. I've got somebody in mind for a rogue.
Okay.
All right, now we got to do the awkward silence with the ending screen, right, Scotty?
It's not really silent.